the kind of clients that you've seen who've been charged with production, I mean, what do they look like? What does the typical client look like? Are they hardcore criminals, or are they other kinds of people?
I would say not hardcore criminals by any stretch. In many cases, it's a desperate family looking to try and either make some ends meet, or I know of one family where there's cancer in the family, and they decided to start a grow operation just to supply their family and friends because the process was just so incomprehensible to them. There's always going to be organized groups as well that are going to be participating, but even there, you're not dealing with somebody that you would recognize or sort of point your finger at and say that looks like a bad person to me. It's often it's a neighbor, somebody that you wouldn't necessarily expect or suspect.
Mm-hmm. And how does the Crown deal with these people? I mean, when you're talking about the average person on the street, you're not talking about...
Well, that's one of the reasons why a lot of folks that are charged with cultivation, as I said, end up getting released. They're not people with a criminal history. They're not people that are generally considered risks to society in terms of being out there. They're people that have, for whatever reason, be it belief, compassion, or economics, have decided to take that step and grow marijuana. In many cases, it's thought of as being sort of the least harmful alternative. Given that the government has all but decriminalized possession now, the federal government doesn't, at least in BC, approve charges for simple possession. They'll only charge for trafficking or cultivation. The thought in many people's minds is that it's a least harmful alternative. I had a client at one point who was charged with trafficking, and her explanation to the court pleading guilty was, I was hungry, I needed food, I was here, I didn't have a job, and it seemed the least harmful thing I could do to try and get some money.
So Ted, it sounds like you've kind of put yourself on the line here.
Well, as I sort of hinted, over 15 years ago, I started the first dispensary in Canada, the Cannabis Buyers Club of Canada, and began helping people with chronic pain. I now have 3,600 members of our club. We have a facility on Johnson Street. We sell 32 edible and topical products that are alternatives to smoking cannabis. We've helped hundreds, if not well over 1,000 people, cut prescription drug use down dramatically by using this medicine edibly and topically. And it can't be underestimated how good it is for people as at times an alternative to smoking, or at least a complementary medicine to it. Mm-hmm. And so it's been a very interesting 15 years, to be sure. I've had a store for 10 years. We went through 4 police raids between 2002 and 2003, but we were acquitted of every charge against us, and in part because we are very careful and diligent to make sure we're only helping people in chronic pain, and in part because Health Canada's programs have been so fundamentally flawed that we are the only realistic alternative for most people. Okay. And so it's something that we actually had a bakery get raided a year and a half ago, though, and my friend Owen Smith has been charged with trafficking THC for making the cookies and the skin products of our club. So we have a 20-day jury trial coming up in January that will challenge the medical marijuana access regulations, and they should include THC, cannabis resin, CBD, CBN. Ironically, synthetic THC is available, $8 a pill, but it doesn't contain the muscle relaxants and other medical benefits that the whole plant medicine can.
Okay. Thanks for joining us. We're going to come back after a short break. You're watching Island Justice with Roger Batchelor.
You're watching an independently produced community access program. The viewpoints expressed are those of the community access producer and do not reflect those of Shaw Cable Systems. The program is presented in response to CRTC policy guidelines regulating community programming.
Welcome back to Island Justice with Roger Batchelor, and today we're talking about the deregulation and regulation of marijuana. And again, we've got Don Mackay from Don Mackay Law Corporation and Ted Smith from International Hempology 101 Society. And just in the break, as a little aside, Don and I were talking about having practiced law about the same amount of time, and come to Victoria about the same amount of time, and maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what you do in your practice.
Well, it's strictly a criminal defense practice. I do trial work as well as appellate work. I take any kind of case, all the way from shoplifting to murder, so if you have trouble, I'm there for you.
Okay. And Ted, speaking about cases, what cases have you been involved in the courts yourself?
Okay, well, I was arrested in November 2000 for sharing joints at the University of Victoria at a 420. I was eventually convicted of trafficking in cannabis for that. I appealed unsuccessfully. I was also arrested 1 week later with 420 pot cookies at an annual pot cookie giveaway. I was eventually convicted by a jury for trafficking in THC for that. I was in 2 of the 4 police raids at the Cannabis Buyers Club I was arrested in as well. And so in one of those, our club was, or I was charged with trafficking cannabis resin, as well as trafficking in cannabis, and was originally convicted of trafficking in resin, but in the appeal process, the Crown dropped the charges, so the 4 raids against the club, we successfully beat them one way or another. I've also had a half dozen, maybe 8 of the growers for the club arrested and charged over the years. I currently employ about 24 growers right now, and one of my growers got busted this February, and so I have a couple of trials going on with growers. I've also come to know many individuals through court as well, and helped provide assistance in various ways at different stages with that, with people without lawyers in particular. And I also sat witness in the trial for the other Compassion Club in town, the Vancouver Island Compassion Club. They had a trial a few years ago that was about 50 days in court, and I saw about 46 of those days. And so I've probably bore witness to close to 100 days of various trials and tribulations in the courtroom. And yeah, studied a lot of case law.
And Don, a lot of people compare what's happening with marijuana now to prohibition of alcohol. What's your take on that?
My take is that I think that there ought to be decriminalization of all possession type charges. I see it as criminalizing the addicts primarily, and not that we're dealing with addicts in terms of this discussion, but it applies all the way through the process. When prohibition to alcohol came along, people still found ways to circumvent it. It created a lot more problems than it actually helped or cleaned up society, if you will. You end up in a situation where if people are addicted or people want a substance, they're going to get it, and the trouble that is created as a result of trying to enforce morality type laws is simply more than it's worth.